Hello, and welcome to the Trust Blueprint. Today, we're diving into one of the most ambitious projects that I've been following closely, making voting easier by expanding access to mobile voting. My guest today is Bradley Tusk. Bradley and I actually met back in 2017, and I've tracked his work ever since. Bradley is the founder of the Mobile Voting Project and Tusk Ventures. I recently watched his TED Talk on mobile voting and was struck by his commitment. 5 years and $10 million of his own money to solve one of democracy's most challenging problems. Bradley brings a unique perspective to this challenge. He was campaign manager for Michael Bloomberg, deputy governor of Illinois, helped companies like Uber and FanDuel overcome regulatory challenges that could have killed them, and literally wrote the book on navigating the intersection of tech and policy, The Fixer. What excites me the most about this conversation is how closely aligned our missions are. At Proof, we're working to secure every digital transaction and empower people to control their online identities. The Mobile Voting Project is tackling these same fundamental challenges of identity, trust, and verification just in the civic space. Having spent decades at the intersection of tech and policy myself, from selling my company to Twitter to leading Proof's legislative efforts in over 40 states, I know how complex it is to build trust infrastructure that satisfies both innovation demands and regulatory requirements. Join us for a conversation that I believe will be invaluable for executives, innovators, and policymakers navigating digital transformation in any regulated industry. Welcome, Bradley. Where are you joining us today?
I'm in New York today.
Awesome. I love it. I was there yesterday. I think we've had the best fall up here in Boston and New England that we've ever had.
It's funny, in New York, fall is really the best time of year. September through December are the magic months. So my youngest is in 11th grade. So in about 20 months, he'll be in college. And I am as committed of a New Yorker as you can get, and I can run you through that. But January, February, March, I'm out. Like, here's one thing no one in the world has ever said. New York is amazing in February, and you could make the same case about Boston.
As a Boston resident, I literally say the same. I say, I love Boston. We just have February, so.
Right. Those 3 months, but really, September, if you're going to visit New York, this is the best time to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So your TED Talk, let's start there,
sure.
Folks listening. So you gave a TED Talk in April, which really crystallized the problem.
Yes,
we do everything on our phones, but we can't vote. And you've dedicated your life to this problem.
Yes.
Why?
So, because to me, I've had, and I know you went through the bio already, but I've just been lucky to have a really weird mix of career experiences. I worked in city government, I worked in state government, I worked in federal government, I worked in the executive branch, the legislative branch, I've run campaigns, and then I worked in tech. And I worked on the kind of campaign that's considered, I think, the seminal tech advocacy political thing in Uber. And when I was running the campaigns all over the U.S. to legalize Uber, the way that we won, because at the time we were a tiny tech startup and taxi was a really powerful industry, and I remember fighting them off in Boston and in Cambridge, like everywhere, is we were able to go to our customers, and you very well may have been one of them, and said, listen, if you like Uber, you got to help us out because we're going to get shut down by the government. Click here to reach your city council member, mayor, whoever the relevant elected official was, and millions of people did over a couple of years, and we won in every single market in the country. And at some point along the way, it hits me that the same people who are advocating for us probably had no clue who their city council member was. They've never voted in a state senate primary, but when we made it really easy, all of a sudden their behavior changed. So the question sort of logically arose, which is, what if they could vote this way? And so I started the Mobile Voting Project in 2017. And the reason to me why it's so necessary is we have created a structure that just doesn't work. In a world of gerrymandering, more than 90% of elections are really decided in the primary. And primary turnout is typically about 10 to 15%. So who are those voters? They're typically either the far right, the far left, or special interests who can move money and votes in low turnout elections. So they decide not just who wins, but then what those people do once they're in office. So like, for example, do you remember when Amazon wanted to put their second headquarters in Queens? This was like maybe 6-7 years ago.
I do.
Right. So hundreds of cities, Boston among them, compete for it. New York wins. We're a little surprised by that, but everyone's very excited, very happy. It's a big deal. Then AOC comes out against it, and that's her politics. She hates jobs, capitalism, technology, all the things you and I love, she hates. Fine. So the state senator for that part of Queens is a guy named Mike Gianaris, and he's just a guy. He's not good. He's not bad. He's not conservative. He's not liberal. He is just a political hack, and that's it. And says to himself, oh, shit. If I now support this deal, I could get a primary from the left. Turnout based on data for that district would be like, 8-9%. And if AOC supports the opponent, he could lose. And Mike literally had a choice. 40,000 new jobs for New Yorkers who needed them, or one, his own, and he picked himself. And the problem isn't that he is uniquely selfish. The problem is he's the norm. That's how pretty much they all are. Mike Bloomberg, who I worked for City Hall and whose mayoral campaign I ran, he was different, but he's Mike Bloomberg, right? Like Mike Bloomberg can't be the norm, right? However, let's say in Mike Gianaris' primary turnout was going to be 37 instead of 9, just because of math. Not because he gives a shit about his constituents, his district, jobs, or anything else. He would have done the deal. And unfortunately, in New York, we have this ridiculous thing where members are really able to block zoning for anything in their district they don't like, because he would want to get reelected. And so in a world where turnout is stuck at 10% and Mike Gianaris' election is determined in the primary, the far left in this case, or other places it could be the far right, or unions or business groups or whatever it is, control everything. And if you want people to vote more, you got to meet them where they are. So as you said, a couple minutes ago, we do our banking on our phones. We do our healthcare, our love lives. Like everything we do is on our phones. If we could vote on our phones, we wouldn't have 100% turnout, but just going from 10 to 30 triples the size of the electorate and the composition of it. And so you have to go to where people are. And the only way to do that is through mobile voting. So to bring this full circle, we started the mobile voting project. I got really lucky. And then when I worked for Uber, they couldn't afford my fee. And Travis asked me if I would take equity. I didn't even know what equity meant, but thank fucking God, I said yes. Right. So that became worth a bunch of money.
You're like the Facebook artist, the guy.
I'm the Facebook hero guy. Totally.
Yeah.
So, so I had some money, and I'm also politically independent, not a member of a party, so I didn't care about making people mad on either side. And so we tested the hypothesis, as you or me, anyone in our industry would do, by running and funding campaigns in 7 different states where either deployed military or people with disabilities were able to vote in real elections on their phones in those states. And we paid out of my foundation, this is totally philanthropic, for those elections, so there was no taxpayer cost. And of course, it worked. Just like you figured out that if people could just do their notarization from their phone instead of the massive pain in the ass process that it was before you, if you make voting easier, more people will do it. So of course it worked. But what we also realized, and our timing of the recording today is really perfect, actually, that the tech that we used was the tech on the market at the time. In fact, there was a Boston company called Votes. Totally good, but it was good for 2,000 soldiers in West Virginia, 3,000 blind people in Oregon. If you're trying to get turnout from 10 to 30, you need really advanced, really secure technology that is open source so that anybody can audit or verify it. And so we began a 5-year project to build our own mobile voting technology, and I can walk you through how it works if you want. But today is the day we finished. It was posted on GitHub this morning. So I'm really excited.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So timing is like literally perfect.
Well, before we get into what it is, though.
Yeah.
Before we get into what it is, maybe let's take a step back. So the problem is I don't know if it's a cart before the horse or a, chicken and egg problem, but what people want in this instance is access, ease. They don't want to have to leave their house and wait in line. I mean, some people do, but I deal with these issues all the time, but they don't actually get to decide to do that. You have to get the politicians first to agree to let the people do it. And of course, what they're concerned about is security, right? There's a lot, especially now in the current administration, around sort of a return.
Well, let me just stop you real fast. They're not concerned about security. They're concerned about changing the status quo and risking their next election. They say security. So what they're actually concerned about and what they say are not the same thing, but nonetheless, they say security.
Well, sure. So then why did you choose to take security head on, right? That's just your own civic belief that that's what's important?
Yeah,
or that was
just because strategy? I've been working around politics since literally I was a sophomore in college. I started working for the mayor of Philadelphia, so that was 1992. So I've been doing this for a very long time. And I knew that while most politicians don't understand anything about how your tech works or my tech works or anything else, if they can't say out loud, "Oh, I don't want more people to vote." That no, they're only Trump could get away with saying something like that, right? No one else could. And so all they can say is, "Well, it's not safe." So my view was the only way to combat that and to beat them is to prove that it is safe. And so that's what we spent. So I've put $20 million of my own money into this so far. 10 million of it went to the tech build itself. And the way that it works, and I think once I walk through it, it'll be pretty clear as to why it's so much safer in the way we vote now is, you would go on the App Store, you would download the Boston Board of Elections app in Loudon County, whatever it might be. And the first question is, okay, is Pat really a registered voter here? You'd put in the last four of your social, your address, fine. So now we know that someone with your name is a registered voter, but we don't know that you're that person, right? So then we do multi-factor authentication, like for the listeners who might not know what that means. It's when you forget your Google password, your Amazon password, they send you a code, you punch it in. Then we do biometric screening. So that's like clear at airports or literally how we all open our phones now. So now we've established, okay, Pat is really Pat. Ballot comes up on your screen, and the ballot itself is meant to be as simple and straightforward as possible. Whenever you're done and you hit submit, three things happen. The ballot's encrypted, the ballot's anonymized, and you get a tracking code. Goes back to the Board of Elections, and they air gap it. So again, for listeners who might not know, air gapping means they take it offline completely. So once the ballot is no longer connected to the internet, then they decrypt your ballot. A paper copy gets printed out. That gets mixed in with all of the other ballots. You can see where your ballot stands because through the tracking code, you'll know it was received, tabulated, printed, and so on. And perhaps most importantly, the code is totally open source. So literally as of this morning, it's on GitHub. Anybody can audit it. Anybody could verify it. And one of the reasons that I felt like we needed to do this is no private company was going to spend 8 figures to build tech and then just give it away to all of their competitors,
For
right?
sure.
So, but yet, if you don't have the trust of it being verifiable because the code itself is open source, people would have every right to question it.
You did more than that, right? You didn't just open source it. I mean, let's talk about this concept of rigorous digital engineering. Like
Yeah,
you
sure.
did more than just open source it.
Yeah. So there's a guy named Joe Canary, and he is like the godfather of electronic voting, the Tim Berners-Lee of electronic voting, right? And Joe and his team, Joe runs, in this case, it's called Free and Fair. So I hired Joe to be in charge of the overall tech build, in part because of his expertise and in part because he was a good check on me, right? So I am, like any sort of tech entrepreneur, super impatient, super aggressive, all the things that you kind of need to be. And yet that's not always, I'm sure you can point to 10 times in your life where you went too far on something and it turned out to be the wrong call in that moment. I didn't trust myself to not want to move faster if I didn't have someone as a check. And what I knew was that Joe was never going to let the tech get posted on GitHub unless it was as good as it could possibly be, because he's not going to risk his own reputation and career for me, right? So partly it's that, but Joe itself uses this process called rigorous digital engineering, and the idea is they are starting with the point that absolutely everything is vulnerable, absolutely everything can be hacked, and it is start at the worst case scenario and then build your way out of it, as opposed to saying, well, we built this thing, and as long as these 12 things don't happen, we should be fine.
So it's interesting. So we have the same constituent. I mean, the secretaries of state across the country
Yeah,
manage elections and
yeah,
official records and
yeah,
notarizations of official records. And, they're you know, not birds of a feather. I mean, they have all different types of
yep,
backgrounds.
yep,
Some are political appointees, some are elected in different states. Some are the same as the governors, some are not. And so ultimately, this is a political process now to manage to
for sure.
drive. And so what's the plan now? Like, or how do
Yeah,
we all in 10 years vote on our phones?
yeah, sure. And it's interesting. I was in Colorado in September, and I did a bunch of meetings with both mayors and secretaries of state, clerks, stuff like that. And you're right. It was some of the clerks were, this is great. My goal, I do this job to make voting easier, so this will help. Others were like, I don't want more work. I don't want anyone to criticize me. My job's hard enough already. Go away, right? But here's the thing. At the end of the day, with all due respect to them, they're still bureaucrats. And you can't let the bureaucrats decide. That's the opposite of democracy, right? And so fundamentally, like you said, it's a political process. And in order for us to make mobile voting available, so we've built it, but until we legalize it, it doesn't really matter. We've got to pass legislation. So there was a couple of jurisdictions that had the authority to do it already. And the New York Times, actually on the front page today, has a story about Anchorage, Alaska, and they are the first jurisdiction in America that's going to do mobile voting in their elections in April. Adams County, Colorado is another. But overall, we need legislation. So we are going to start running bills around the country next year. The legislative sessions run typically from January to June that would authorize mobile voting for city elections. So our view is let's start local, see how it works. It's a new technology. So like, while I know that it is exponentially more secure than the ways we vote now, we're still going to learn a lot from it and, keep adjusting the tech, keep working on it. It's open source. Other people can help too, right? It doesn't have to just be us. And then once, we're pretty confident, like, okay, we know it works, we know it doesn't work, then we can move up to state elections and then eventually federal. And the funny thing is the only election that may not need mobile voting is the presidential. So average turnout in the elections that typically matter in the U.S., like we said, is a primary election about 10%. The presidential gets about 66%. So it'd be fine, but most people, you and I, are willing to go sit in the cold online to vote for president because it feels so important.
Yeah,
So,
I agree, but I still, when I've engaged in this topic, I find that really people conflate two different issues. When one is the integrity of the voting rolls, and the other is the integrity of the voting process, right? And I just fundamentally believe
right.
that a digital voting process is more secure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
And the, having researched what you've brought, or I wouldn't say bring to market because you're not selling it, what you've gifted, the integrity of that chain of custody and auditability of it is such a tremendous advancement. And then you still have the roles problem, but they're two different problems. And I find often people in the political space, they want to say basically that you can't go digital until you first fix the roles. And we can debate whether or not they're bad or not bad, but that's just their.
That's like, honestly, when the teachers union say, well, you can't fix education until you fix poverty, which just means don't hold us accountable for anything ever, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can't, this country, in my view, is not in great shape. We can list the litany of problems, but the reality is the listeners already know them. And I don't think we are one country in 20 years unless we prove that the two parties can work together and we can get things done. When all of our government is either the chaos and dysfunction of Washington, D.C., or just totally one-sided governments, whether it's the state of Texas on the right or the city of Portland on the left, neither good, then you're not representing the will of the voters. And the ironic thing is, 80% of us can basically agree on pretty much everything, right? Like, take guns. The vast majority of us would say we shouldn't storm everyone's homes who have guns legally and confiscate them, but it shouldn't be easy to walk into a store and walk out with an assault rifle. Or immigration. Most people would say if people are working in meat packing plants and filling a critical need in the economy so that meat doesn't cost twice as much because they take minimum wage, don't deport them. But you can have strong border security, right? These two things are not mutually exclusive. Pretty much every single issue you could think of, there is 80% consensus. The problem is 80% don't vote in the primaries. The 10 that do are totally unreasonable. And if you want to get reelected, you just got to make the 10% happy, which means scream, point fingers, call names, insult people online. And that just makes us all depressed and cynical and hopeless. And that's a terrible path to be on, you know? Right, but we can fix it, and we can fix it with technology.
We can, and I really encourage people listening to watch your TED Talk and read the article in the Times, say, learn about the project. But ultimately, we do need people to get involved, and so maybe changing gears a little bit. As I've watched your career and the successes that you've had, Uber. In my business of notarizations, and for folks who are listening and don't know, we've been successful in influencing about 40 state laws, several federal policies.
He's being modest. They've been extraordinarily successful. As someone who practices this, I'm almost jealous that you were able to do this without us, quite frankly, because you make me look bad.
I know. I will say, though, back in the day,
I'm the only one that can do this shit.
Yeah, no, but when we met back in well, I had a co-founder who was fantastic at this, and we have an amazing team still today
Yeah,
who focus on things. But
yeah,
when we met back in 2017, I give you a lot of credit because you said to us your strategy is actually pretty good,
it was.
and so you said that you thought our money would be better spent in the states and driving policy versus with you guys, and I really respected I think clearly coming off your success with Uber, you probably had a lot of, options and work and, so you had
Yeah,
to,
but
but
look, I've adopted the worldview and a practice, and I'm pretty sure you have too, which is I just say what I think. You do what you think is right. It might at times not benefit you in the short term, but it really does work out in the long term. And this is a little more philosophical than you might have wanted for this podcast, but to me, happiness is feeling good about yourself on a consistent basis, right? And that might not equate with always winning everything, always getting everything, but it's feeling good about yourself. And sometimes that might be telling someone, you don't need me. Let me give you some advice, and you can always call me, but you're okay without me. And sometimes it isn't.
and I appreciated that, but I think one of the things that has frustrated me at times is we are often compared to Uber, and I actually see them as being wildly different journeys. And I say that because having it's actually funny. I was in the New York Times in like 18 or 19 in an article about taking Ubers to the airport because the Logan airport was changing
Yep.
the regulations to send you to the garage. And I was so pissed. And I
Yep.
ended up getting featured in the Times about how ludicrous it was. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Totally.
my point in telling that is Uber caught a consumer zeitgeist, right? And you were able to use consumer interest in the service
Yeah.
in order to influence, regulators. In my business, I used to always describe it as like imagine you took an Uber to the airport, but they said, no, that doesn't count, go home and try again. Right. And because our
Right.
transaction had to be accepted,
Yeah.
I had to get approval before I could ever build the
Yes.
consumer base to
Right.
drive engagement, right?
Yeah.
So engagement, I think, is the key to influence, right? And it could be positive engagement or negative engagement. The very first thing you have to do is get people to give a shit, right? And the problem with voting right now is that at the local level, people don't give a shit,
Right.
right? So how do we solve this problem of not just providing the technology and the access, but getting them to care enough in the local issues that they show up?
Right. So two things. The first thing is how do we get them to give a shit to help us pass the bills? Because keep in mind, a lot of the special interests who win in a system of low turnout primaries are not going to want mobile voting, and politicians by instinct do what the special interests want. So we're going to have to get many, many millions of people, and that's part of the reason I'm going on every podcast I can. And thank you for having me. Is to start raising awareness to reach out to their elected officials and say, I want the ability, I want the right to vote on my phone. And we are going to do a really big grassroots campaign. That's the only way we're going to win. So we were lucky that we were able to just bring on someone from Mr. Beast's digital team to work with us.
Awesome.
We're lucky that, for example, Teddy Solomon, who's the founder and CEO of Fizz.social, which is like the predominant campus app, is a big supporter of ours. And so Gen Z is a really big part of it. And then we have some other constituencies, as you can imagine, deployed military, people with disabilities. Imagine, we think voting's a pain in the ass. Imagine doing it blind and then hoping the people, the person that you told them that you wanted to vote for is what they cast on the ballot. They could have just said, and then just done the opposite. Civil rights, which kind of surprised me a bit, but it makes sense when you think about it, which is like I was talking to MLK the third, and he's become a supporter of ours. And his point to me was, look, the reason why they want you to have to show up is to come up with then some excuse to turn you away. If I'm voting in my living room, there's nothing they can do about it. By the way, that was a big, the African American community was a huge base of support for us with Uber for the exact same reason, right? Because every African American you and I have ever met has had the experience of having their hand up in an empty taxi passing them by, and we were able to use that. So we're going to have to pass a big grassroots, build a big grassroots movement to pass the bills, and then we're really going to need the partnership, and I've had good initial conversations of all of the really big platforms, the social media platforms, the operating platforms, and just to say, not who to vote for, but like, hey, did you know that in Boston now, you can vote on your phone if you want to in municipal elections or whatever it is, click here to get the City of Boston app, right? And my hope is that they will be willing to work with us on this, because if they are, Some people will ignore it, but a lot of people were like, all right, I'm not going to be late for work. I'm not taking my kid to school on a Tuesday so I can vote while they're waiting for their coffee, while they're sitting in traffic. Whatever. I guess you shouldn't vote while you're in traffic, but whatever it is, a minute, you might choose to do it.
You
So,
joke, you say that. We
right.
actually, in Notarized, the very early years, we had people that would call in driving, and we had to build ways to detect, the fact that they're connected to a car Bluetooth and
Right.
not letting them because they're driving down the highway,
Yeah, it's crazy. Right, right. And that, yeah, look, when we have fully if you're in a Waymo, it's fine. If
Yeah.
you're not, wait till you get somewhere. But we're gonna need that. Here's the only good news about how terrible the system is today, because turnout's like 10. If we got to 30, which is still pathetic, by the way, but if we got to 30, we're tripling the size of the electorate. We're changing the composition of the electorate. It moves things to the middle, and the whole goal here is to take the political incentives that today's tell elected officials scream, point fingers, hurl insults, and instead, oh, the majority wants shit to get done, so work together, compromise, find consensus. You're not going to get everything you want. That's okay. And to get to a world where we can do that, and then kind of second order, if we do that, like I speak at college campuses about this all the time, and I always ask, like, who here has any confidence government can solve your problem? And no one ever raises their hands, right? And who can blame them? But let's say turnout goes from 10 to 30. Let's say people start working together. Bills start to pass that actually solve real problems. Then it is possible to college student says, all right, maybe they feel a little better about the system. Maybe some of them go work in government. They're a little more trusting. And just like things can sort of cycle in a negative way, things can cycle in a positive way. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I know this is perhaps off topic, but I have to go there with you, which is that, I'm of course a proponent of technology. In our business, we did a lot of research around access, and so like in the state of California, one of the primary arguments we made was we did a big survey, and we figured out it was actually one of the least equitable states for access. Right? Issues of rural communities, minority communities, language and things like that. So I am so pro technology, meeting people on their phones and devices, efficiency. I mean, all these things. I will say politically, I also think that technology is part of the death of this country, and I say that because if you think about 100 years ago, people in Congress making a decision, the flow of information, the time gap between something happening, a decision, it allowed for a contemplative process. It allowed for people to have opinions that they could form. And we are a constitutional republic, not a democracy, right? We elect representatives who are supposed to be experts on topics. And the fact that I get asked or polled some question that I have no basis of knowledge in this feedback loop now, I think is a huge problem as well. I don't know how we solve
No,
that, but
your thought. So I worked in the U.S. Senate from 2000 2002. I was Chuck Schumer's communications director. It was post-internet, but pre-Twitter. And once Twitter became this thing and social media became a thing, here's what changed, and you totally nailed it, which is when I was there, Chuck could still meet with a Republican senator quietly, discuss a compromise. It may lead something, it may not, but at least they could do it, right? Post Twitter, the minute that someone spots Chuck walking into that guy's office or that guy walking into Chuck's office, it gets posted, and then the base goes crazy. How dare you talk to the other side? How dare you violate our principles? And then what that does is it scares the shit out of the politicians.
yeah,
They
that's
stay in their corners, and nothing can get done.
I mean, I think I don't know how to solve that problem. That's
Well,
a
I
huge
think that if
one.
you don't, in my view, every policy output is the result of a political input. Every politician makes every decision solely based on the next election and nothing else. There are some exceptions, Bloomberg being one of my career, but there are exceptions. And so when we're at 10% turnout and primaries dictate everything, once people on Twitter go nuts, they're terrified that change. But if it's 30% or 40%, then Twitter doesn't represent the base because the base is not the entirety of the electorate. And then, because here's one, no matter how dumb you think your politician that represents you might be, and you might be right, they are all geniuses when it comes to knowing who votes in their
Oh,
next election.
I agree. And
And
managing sentiment and
they know that better than anyone. So when it's 10%, they're able to calibrate, oh shit, I can't risk looking like we're talking to the other side. When it's 30 or 40%, it might be, oh shit, I can't risk looking like I'm so intransigent that I'm not open to trying to get things done.
Yeah.
But with that said, I would argue that we also need things like repealing Section 230. There's a lot of other reform, because even if you go outside of the realm of politics, the problem to me is human beings have a negativity bias, right? So we know that when we see a lion, go the other way. When we smell gas, leave the house. It's an evolutionary trait. But the problem is it applies across the board. So when you're online and there's, say, two headlines, one that's really negative, one that's not, we instinctively pick the negative
Well,
one.
I agree completely. I mean, the other thing I always just on my soapbox rant about is I don't think that more bad things are happening in the world today than 30 and 40 or 50 years ago.
Totally.
It's just all day, every day, I know about all of the bad things that are happening.
Everything, everywhere, all at once. So think about it. You go online, and what are the two emotional things that happen? One, you compare your real life and all of your anxieties and frustrations, everything else, to everyone else's fictional curated life. So it seems like everyone's happier than you, everyone's having more fun than you, everyone's doing better than you. And then you see everything going wrong everywhere, and you're like, well, the world is terrible and my life is terrible, and you're depressed,
Yeah,
right?
no,
And then to make it worse, because the platforms have no liability for the content posted on them, they are actually perversely economically incentivized to push the most toxic content. Look, I had a daughter, I've talked this publicly before, who, was one of those teenage girls you heard about during COVID, who developed a self-harm problem that she learned about on Instagram, and, she's okay, but she was hospitalized. It was a really horrible
I'm sorry.
experience. And thank you. And she's fine now, but, and maybe that would have happened anyway, but clearly we don't have to have Instagram pages that show young girls how to cut themselves, right?
Well,
But
I
because,
mean, OpenAI is in the news now for similar reasons. I think I mean, I've got young kids. It's such a concern.
yeah, yeah. But if you repeal Section 230, the economic incentive, Section 230 is the law that holds the platforms harmless. The economic incentives change. Content moderation becomes important, because then you're trying to protect your bottom line. And then all of a sudden, a lot of that content is no longer available. So my hope is that it can go in the right direction. The problem is, ironically, to bring this full circle again, every politician in a vacuum says, yes, we should repeal Section 230. We should fix this. In fact, in 2020, the only issue that both Biden and Trump had in common on their platform was repealing Section 230. And Biden even called for it in the State of the Union. However, you're a staffer for, a random congressman. In this case, it's a federal question. And the meta lobbyist drops by your office, and they see you at a bar, and they're like, oh, I saw your boss came out for repealing Section 230. It'd be a real shame if someone spent $5 million against him in the next primary. You tell your boss, done, right? Gone. And that is what has happened.
Well, it's privacy legislation. I mean, so many of these
Right, all
issues
of
that
it.
everybody agrees, but they can't get
But
it
if you
done.
had 30, 40% primary turnout, that $5 million threat is less scary, because instead of being concentrated among 10%, it's spread out over 40, and it makes those interests less powerful.
Yeah, maybe that's a good segue. So your book, The Fixer, and your other, life of helping companies, at the state and federal level to drive policy. The thing I've learned in the 11 years I've done this is it's 1,000, if not 10,000 times easier to kill a bill than to pass a bill.
100%.
And I just don't think, I have founders contact me all the time and they want to talk and get advice. And I can tell in the first 2 minutes if they have what it takes to really go do this. And I'm just curious, like, what is your rubric when someone walks in the door and says, hey, Bradley, I want to go enable flying cars?
Right.
How do you figure out if they're for real?
A quick plug. So I wrote a novel a few years ago, Obvious in Hindsight, and it is about the politics of flying cars. So if you were always wanting to read a tech regulatory novel, this is your
When did you write that?
It came out in 2023, I think.
So it's funny about that then. Maybe just this, you and I can walk out for a minute, which is that one of the things we did in our strategy early on was get the Council of State Governments to actually come out with a position on online notarization. Right. And they've been debating flying cars, haven't they been?
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. When I first started work, do you know who Steven Soderbergh is, the movie director? Okay. So do you know how celebrities, you guys can use this, I've said the story publicly before, but it's obviously a little off topic, but do you know how celebrities like to buy liquor companies?
Yes.
Yes. So Soderbergh buys this Bolivian brandy company. And and Steve a wonderful guy and a brilliant guy, but he's not a political guy, right? And what he hadn't quite thought about was alcohol is A, regulated because it's alcohol, B, his product is imported, C, Bolivia is a communist country with whom we have no diplomatic ties. So he needed a federal rule change for a very narrow thing, but he needed it. And we met and we ran a campaign for him and we got the rule changed. Took 2 years, but it did happen. And while we're working on this, he said, like, we did a pro bono just 'cause I was a fan of his work, and it wasn't like, actually, it was hard, but it wasn't that hard. And he said, what can I do for you? And the galley of the fixer had just come, so the fixer had come at just the galley, like a few days before, and we were in my office, and I said, oh, I wrote this book. I just love your opinion on it. That was it. Like, and I gave him a copy. He said, I'm flying to London tonight. I'll read it. I wake up, we got to make a fictional TV show about this. So I started thinking about, okay, what would be a campaign is a good construct for a show, right? Because there's like a very specific binary outcome that you're working towards. But I wanted something that was out there a little bit to make it really interesting, but not completely fictional. And so I picked Flying Cars. And so I wrote a pilot that Stephen then helped me with, that we wrote together, about a campaign to legalize flying cars in New York, LA, and Austin, with on one side Uber and taxi against in United, the Audubon Society, the socialists, the transit unions, and the Russian mob. And in favor of it was the flying car startup and their vicious political consultants meeting us, right? And the whole crazy shit happens. So I write the next 9 episodes and we go pitch it. And our first big meeting is with Apple TV, set for March 10th, 2020. As you can imagine, COVID hits that week. Meetings never happen. And the show just kind of goes away. And I thought, you know what? I really kind of like what I have here. Let me try to make it a novel. But writing a novel, for me at least, was hard. So it didn't come out for a couple of years. I had to write it, I had to get it published. I was lucky that a publisher wanted it, but still, from the time that Steve and I had the first conversations, the time the book came out, Flying Cars advanced so much that it went from this like kind of fantasy concept to like a real fucking thing. Yeah, it's amazing.
Thing. But it's also, I don't think, I mean, the other point I was trying to make is that I just don't think that people understand that a lot of these issues are actively being debated in these very, I don't want to call it wonky, but like centers of government policy. And what was so interesting is no one shows up to these things. Like there's no one there. And the people working on these things are actually very, intelligent, engaged, and approaching it from just we got to figure this out.
Yeah. That's the thing one of the things that really annoys me about tech and VC is the inherent disdain for government, which, okay, there's a lot to not like. We've just spent 40 minutes talking about what not to like. However, there's a lot of people who really care, work really hard, want to do the right thing, are trying, and they have so much trouble getting any attention for their ideas. Like when Mondani won in New York a few weeks ago, I have a Substack, and I wrote like a mini magazine of different pieces of advice to different constituencies within what's going to be my mayoralty. And I wrote one to the press corps covering him, and I said, when they have an announcement, give them a chance. Don't just sit there and ignore them and ask about whatever latest minor controversy or scandal there is. These are hardworking people who care a lot, and they're trying hard to make better policy for people's lives. Take it seriously. Show them respect. And, the press tends to not do that. The public's not aware of it. And, I don't give a shit about Jeffrey Epstein one way or the other. That's all we talk about, right? Like, Jeffrey Epstein does not impact schools getting better or people getting health care or energy being more affordable or whatever else it is, right? So yeah, I'm with you 100%. But to answer your original question, there's 2 red flags for me. The first one would be founders who are the opposite of you, where they come in and say to me, you don't get it. I went to Stanford. I was in Y Combinator. Andreessen Horowitz led my Series A. So when these stupid regulators or politicians see how smart I am, they're just going to do whatever I want. And I'm like, I'm out. Because if I have to change your personality first to pass a bill, it's not worth it. There's too many founders to work with. The other is sometimes there are issues where you're just like, yeah, that's a cool idea, but the reality is the political fight needed is just too great to work for the amount of resources you have, the amount of bandwidth you have, and therefore it just doesn't make sense. So those are typically, to me, the two big red flags.
Yeah, it's interesting. Addressing the first thing on personality, I often tell people that we were successful just because of basic first principles thinking, right? And I do believe that, you know, there's a lot of, BS in government as we've discussed on this, discussion so far. But like at its core, a lot of people when it comes to like things around safety and soundness, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But also, if I haven't had to think about this previously and you're going to make me think about it, right?
Yeah.
So you got to make it very simple for them. And so, like, where we were successful was basically saying, let's just talk about the purpose of a notarization, right? And then let's talk about in today's world, would we do it the way we've been doing it with a little book that sits in someone's desk? Well, okay, well, of course not, right? So then you have a basis of at least, well, could we imagine a world where you could do it better, right? And treating them like some thought partnership of saying, what would you do in this scenario? What would make you comfortable in this scenario? I think the challenge then is you have to be delivering at the same time, right? You have to be coming in and saying, hey, you said if we could check a person's ID online, well, guess what? Here it is. You said we could do this. You said we could do that, which ultimately then comes down to the investors. Like the investors have to be on the same page
Yeah.
about how to play this game and about making the investment. And there's not many out there that are willing to do that, right? So you have a fund as well.
Yes.
How have you thought about supporting companies? And also, I'm sure that companies are asking you to talk to the other investors to explain
Yeah.
this. Like, how do we?
Well, for me, all the time, by the way, it's a surprisingly big part of my job that I didn't expect going in. So it is our fund, and I pivoted the business a bit, so I can explain in a second, but fundamentally, seed Series A, and we look at all the same stuff as every early stage fund, the founder, the TAM, the idea, whatever. But then we ask two questions. One, is there a gating regulatory issue or opportunity that if it were solved could really drive growth and valuation? And if so, can we solve it? And when the answer is yes to both, that's when we make sense. So companies like FanDuel, Lemonade, Row, Bird, Circle, Coinbase, Latch, so on. And then we run really big campaigns in cities and states, sometimes federal, but I really try to avoid DC as much as I possibly can, to be honest, to then legalize whatever it is. And sometimes it's something that already exists, but we have to sort of disrupt and entrench interest and stop them politically. And sometimes it's, crypto or AI or flying cars, and there is no regulatory framework, which is easier in one way because you don't have someone trying to kill you, but it's harder in another way because there's nothing, right? You got to build something. So that's where we tend to get involved. But you're right, frequently, part of my job is they're raised to the next round, and I get on the phone or my team, whoever the subject matter expert is, with someone at the fund to explain, here are the regulatory issues, here's how we see them, here's why I chose to deploy capital, right? So it's not, I literally put my money where my mouth is, and here's my strategy. And you could think I'm wrong politically if you want. I'm not always right, but here's why I think this makes sense. And generally speaking, our experience was we have that conversation, that issue goes away as a concern because most people feel like, okay, you're handling it responsibly. He might be right, he might be wrong, he might win, he might lose, whatever, but at least you're going about it in a reasonable, thoughtful way.
Yeah, then the most important question then is time, right? Because, so to tell a story, so I was, came on the scene and I was very fortunate the mortgage industry decided to get a shit out of the gate, right? And the title industry. So I think it was so disruptive to them that they created that heat that allowed for a real discussion. And we engaged, and I'm very thankful, to that industry. But I was at an event, and someone who was the vice chair of First American Title, I've been very, close with. He's a wonderful man. I asked him, I said, like, when are people going to take me seriously? He said 7 years. I was like, oh my God, now here I am. It's been 11 years, but
yeah.
And he said, look, do you have any idea how many people have come into the real estate industry with some newfangled technology that's going to disrupt everything and like go out of business in 3 years?
Yeah, 98%.
Yeah. And he's like, it's about staying power, right? And it's about showing these people you're not going anywhere. You're going to see it through. So when you assess these projects and you think about actually deploying capital or staying behind things, do you have any framework for like how long different types of things are going
Yeah,
to
I
take?
mean, a lot of it really comes down to, and you fell into one bucket here, which is, do you need the regulatory thing immediately because you can't operate without it? So you have that lemonade insurance is a good example of that for us, where you can't sell insurance out of license. You'll go to jail if you do. So we had to go get licenses in every single state for them to be able to operate. Once we won a bunch, it started to roll, but still. The other would be it already exists, and there's nothing really like take Uber, right? The regulations around all the stuff that we did, they already existed, and we complied with them, right? It was just this question of that we were disruptive to the taxi industry, and the regulatory fight was not really a regulatory fight; it was a market share fight, disguised as a regulatory fight, right? So once we won that, there was actually nothing else to really do, or little stuff popped up, but by and large, that was it. So sometimes, we've got to do it right away. It's happening at seed or A or whatever it is. We've had other times where FanDuel, we came in actually at the Series E in that particular case because they'd been operating. And then all of a sudden, this scandal happened. It would turn out to be bullshit, but nonetheless. And 43 states said, you got to stop. And then all of a sudden, we had to start passing bills and fixing it everywhere. But one other point you made, which is just really important, the rule of thumb in our industry that even the American title guy said to you is not just 7 years for taken seriously, but if you're investing early stage, it's sort of a 7-year life cycle. It's not. It's a 10-year life cycle, right? It is so rare that a startup that I invest in, from the day that it gets going to the day the IPO happens and the lockup expires, is 7 years. And another time where I won't invest, forget even the regulatory stuff is great, is if I just don't like, if the founder viscerally is someone that I'm like, I don't really like this
I agree
person,
with you.
right? I'm like, I can't be married to this person for a decade, even if they're going to make me a crazy amount of money,
I
because
agree.
I have spent especially if I'm on the board, I've spent so much time with these people that
Life's short.
life's too short for that. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. So the other thing, when it comes to politics that I've really sort of conceptualized in my own mind is this concept of the final boss, right? And what I've learned, there's the notion of like raw political power, right? At the outset, we said it's 10,000 times easier to kill a bill than pass a bill. And I think when I started doing all this, I had this notion that, you could meet with all these people and build consensus and kumbaya, and everyone would agree, but then all of a sudden it would die, right?
Yeah.
And what I learned over time is there was probably just literally one person,
Yep.
one organization, but that organization had invested 30 years in building
Okay.
relationships, and they had the ability to just one phone call, we don't like it, and it's dead. And so this idea of now what I really try to do is from the outset understand who is that player, how do I
Yep.
get to them, and how do I just go have the
Right.
conversation?
Yeah.
And I think that's what then, makes you a player yourself is you
Right.
show up and you're like, hey, you know?
Especially if they have reason to fear you. I
Yeah,
mean,
and so do you agree with that? That's the way this.
I do. Let me give you two examples. One is outside of the tech realm a bit, but education reform. So I've worked a lot on expansion of charter schools and all kinds of things to try to make our schools better. And we had a great moment in the early 2010s where we won all of these bills. And then here's why we ultimately kind of lost tons of ground, which was our financial backers were the hedge fund guys. And they were very happy to win. And then they kind of got bored and they moved on to something else. And you know who never gets bored, never goes away? The teachers unions. They're at every shitty little fundraiser, every little event with a $10,000 check, year in, year out. And eventually, what legislators would say to me is, you guys are sort of variable. We can't rely on you. We know we can rely on these guys. We know that if we oppose them, they'll always oppose us. If we support them, they'll always support us. And that's what we're going with. Or in our industry, autonomous vehicles. So in 2015, a decade ago, the House Energy Subcommittee unanimously, bipartisan, passed a regulatory framework for autonomous driving. We need that. Makes sense. The Teamsters, because they don't are like the idea of autonomous trucking, which is actually crazy because there's so many more unfilled trucking jobs than there are truckers, but nonetheless, they don't like it. So Trump gets elected, and Trump sees himself as a Teamsters guy. He stops it. Biden gets elected. Biden sees himself as a Teamsters guy. He stops it. And now we got Trump again. So literally no progress has been made federally. So you could, in many states, I don't know about Massachusetts, but in many states, autonomous trucking, autonomous driving is legal, but you can't cross state lines. And at least, especially in the trucking space,
That's the whole game.
yeah, that's the game, right? So So that is frequently the case. And by the way, so sometimes the answer to me is what you said. Sometimes it's a question of venue choosing.
Yeah.
So if the only way for us to solve a problem is to pass a law through Congress, to me, that's the equivalent of a miracle. I can't make an investment based on a miracle. If it's states, there's a lot of them, but in some ways, I got 50 bites at the apple. I can build precedent. I can figure out, maybe I start in red or blue or whatever, but it's actually ultimately a better approach.
But I think for people listening, I think I agree with you. But the reason why it's a miracle is not only because you have to get the votes, but because you have to attach it to something. And that's what we've seen
Yes.
endlessly. It's
Yeah.
not, it's, there's a lot of things that people want to in Congress pass. It's just literally nothing that's moving,
Well,
right?
and then there's also the Christmas tree problem, which
Yeah.
is the idea is you put when there is a vehicle, so many ornaments, so many different
Yeah.
bills get put on it, and the whole thing collapses under its own weight.
Yes. So to build on something you said, though, I think it is. I do want to take a moment to sort of admonish the tech industry. You mentioned that there's these founders who say they went to Stanford and they have this bravado.
Yeah.
You know, the many of these groups have actually supported us, and so you know the National Association of Realtors are actually investors in my business, and they're very politically influential for one reason. They show up, like you described, of the teachers union, right? And as do the state associations. And we work with a lot of, you know, fantastic trade associations and whatever, right? And the thing I've really come to appreciate at the end of the day, if you go into a local community, the title agent is a member of the Rotary Club, right? They're leaders in their community,
Yep.
as are the realtors.
Yep.
You know, they volunteer, they're engaged in politics, they're business owners, right? They
Totally.
create jobs in the community. And that's hard to disrupt because it should be hard to disrupt,
Yeah.
right? And I think people don't realize that is, you know, at the end of the day, like at the local level, that's what.
Yeah, so it matters. Let me give you two examples. So one is Tesla was a client of ours. This was, probably about 7, 8 years ago. And they wanted, I think very reasonably, to be able to sell cars online. And of course, the car dealerships hated that idea because it would totally disrupt their business. And not used car dealers, but regular car dealers are like the realtors. They sponsor the Little League team. They're in the parade. They're in the Chamber of Commerce. And I remember saying to Elon, when he was sort of involved more granularly, I think back then, in this kind of stuff, like, we can pass these bills, but I'm going to have to tear these guys to shreds. I'm going to have to go and find out every DUI they've gotten, every tax lien, and it's going to be really ugly. And he said, and it was a reasonable choice, the brand damage of you doing that isn't worth the upside, and he didn't do it. Totally fine, right? Or the realtors are a great example. So this wasn't a business thing, but out of my foundation, I ran a bill in 2024 in New York City to ban brokers' fees for rental apartments. So there were only 2 cities in America that said, in addition to having to pay first month, last month, security, you got to pay these people 15% of the annual rent too. Your city, Boston, and mine, New York. Boston then finally ended this practice because, of course, now all the information's online. What is the broker doing? Nothing. And thank God the realtors, because they're not they're selling, they're not dealing with renting, did not get involved. And as a result, we were able to pass the bill, and now you can no longer charge broker's fees for rental apartments in New York. But it was simply because the entity that could have actually probably beat us sat it out.
Yeah, which is, you know, that's often the game, is to get certain people to sit out.
Yeah, and by the way, sometimes you do that by having a conversation, and sometimes they agree, and if they don't, you might have to level a threat or two of like, this is not going to be pain free if you choose to do this, and those are hard conversations to have.
Well, and I think people don't realize how you can team up on some issues and not others,
Yeah,
and it's again, it's staying power, it's being in the game, it's having the relationships,
we're
right?
figuring that out with Mondami right now in New York, where there are things that I either agree with him on, or just as someone who was born here, lives here, raised my kids here. I own, in addition to the business we discussed, I own a bookstore. I'm a New Yorker. I want the mayor, whoever it is, to succeed. And so I've been talking to him, and where we don't agree on a lot of stuff, but where I can be helpful, I will. And then there are other things like, say, charter schools that he might try to abolish completely. And we're going to have to fight that one out, and like, you can do that.
I wish that in some ways we had actually solicited questions from people, before talking.
I'll
Because
come
I feel
back,
like
man.
you
Do
and
it
I
again.
could go.
Well, let's do this. post this one, say we'll take questions, and then
Yeah, if
whenever
we
you
get
have
any,
enough,
we
I'll
should
come
do it
back.
again. So my final two questions are just what is your generic advice when a founder approaches you and says, I want to go change the law to enable my idea?
Yeah. So it is research. And the kinds of things you have to understand are one, what is the law you're trying to change? What's its background? Who cares about it? Who supports it? Who opposes it? How much relative political power do those people have on either side? What else are you competing with? How much time and money would it take to do that? If you choose to ignore the law and move forward, what risk are you taking? If it's impounding a scooter like we did with Bird, so what? If you're trading crypto without a bit license in New York and it's 10 years in jail, that doesn't make sense. So the first thing is, and I think founders frequently in startups and regulated industries, they take engineering seriously, they take go-to-market seriously, they take fundraising seriously. They don't always take regulation seriously. You can get all those other things right. If you really blow the regulation, you're still going to go out of business. So my advice is you need to know what you're getting into.
Some doom and gloom
Yeah.
on this conversation around the future of the country and civic engagement and things like that, but also totally solvable problem. And you've just, launched a product that really can have an impact. But all the sort of totality of issues in your mind, do you just have one thing you wish that could be passed at the federal level that would really, change the future of this country's civic engagement?
I mean, of course, to me, it's mobile voting. But it's funny, I was writing my Substack for Tuesday about kind of what are the societal causes of unhappiness and then what are the solutions. And this, I'm going to give you a bit of or 5 answers to your one question, which is of the things I had on there, mobile voting, universal basic income, because I think we're really going to need that when AI fully starts displacing jobs. I think that's already happening. Repealing Section 230, mandatory national service, a higher floor on things like school meals and just the basics, because we just are too rich of a country for people to not have that kind of stuff. And really using AI intelligently to solve problems and anticipate where it can be truly harmful and build some systems to be able to deal with that and prevent it when you can.
Well, look, for folks that are out there who want to support the cause,
Mobilevoting.org.
mobilevoting.org, it's important. And ultimately, who wants to get in the car and wait in the cold? For us in February in Boston, even November, it can be cold. So
yeah, totally. We will save you from the cold. Just help us pass mobile voting.
Well, I appreciate you, Bradley, and I really respect you, putting your money and your time behind what you care about. And thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, man.
That's all the time we have for today's episode. A huge thank you to my guest, Bradley, for sharing his insights on building trust at the intersection of technology, policy, and democracy. If you're interested in learning more about the mobile voting project, visit mobilevoting.org and definitely check out Bradley's book, The Fixer, for more stories about navigating the complex world of tech and politics. You can find the Trust Blueprint on Apple and Spotify, along with full video versions on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe for our latest episodes. Thanks, folks.